Great, thanks, Liz, and thank you everybody for attending. Really excited about this session. Looking forward to hopefully educating a little bit and giving you some great options to move along your journey for both GDPR and the Microsoft modern data platform, right? So my name is Chris Sefurlis. I'm a senior principal architect over here at Pragmatic Works, and my co-presenters are Abraham Samuel. He's a TSP from Microsoft, a technical support personnel, as well as Brian Knight, our CEO and founder here at Pragmatic Works. So let's jump right in and ask the question, what is GDPR? For anybody who's not familiar with it, I think most people should be at this point. It's coming fast, right? So May 25th, 2018, the European Parliament will start enforcing this, and it could get costly, up to 20 million euro or 4% of annual global turnover. Those are some really big numbers, and you did not want to be the person that gets fined for not being compliant. Over on the right-hand side, you can see that we've got a sort of a snippet of what the General Data Protection Regulation encompasses. It's not everything, but just so you have a general idea, it's your name, it's your identification number, social security number, email address, online user information, social media, medical information, all of this stuff. Some of it's kind of a no-brainer, right? We don't want it out there in the public anyway. But certainly things like your name, that's something that's really surprising to some people. And one thing that should stand out to people is that we also this is covering all European inhabitants. So if you have a European citizen here in the US and their information is in one of your data sets, you are, you need to adhere to these rules. So just keep that in mind as we go along. The keys to changing, the key changes to address GDPR, really, first of all, we're going to look at that personal privacy, right? So the individuals have the right to get their data. They need to know what you have on them and what they can get back, right? So they need to be able to pull the data out at any time, erase it from your system with their own power to be able to do that, right? Organizations need to have controls and notifications on, how to protect employees and citizens, and get the correct information around those, as well as data breaches, and get the appropriate consent. You'll see that a lot of web pages now will notify you as you go onto the page that this site uses cookies. This is a function of that type of protection. You also need transparent policies, right? So you need to provide clear notice of data collection. So if you're collecting data about someone, you need to notify them. You need to outline, processing purposes and use cases. Why are you collecting this data? And define those data retention and deletion policies. And also, organizations really need to train their personnel, their employees, audit those processes for training as well as compliance, have a data protection officer defined, and, create and manage compliant vendor contracts. So the specific articles around GDPR compliance when it, relates to data is, Article 25, control, access, process minimal necessary data, integrated safeguards, 32, security of processing, 33, notification of a personal data breach, 30, records of processing activities, and 35, data protection impact assessment. So these are the specific articles. You can go and get the GDPR documentation and read through them if you want more specific details about these. We just highlight some of the high-level things here. Next, what we'll do is we'll walk through really how to get compliant. It's a four-step process, using Microsoft tooling. So first you want to discover, really identify what personal data you have and where it resides. Then you want to manage it. So you want to govern how that personal data is used and accessed. You want to protect it. So establish some security controls to prevent, detect, and respond to vulnerabilities and data breaches. And then you have to report on it. So report on a breach or keep the required documentation and understand where you could be out of compliance. And when we look at the first step, where you're discovering, right? You want to inventory personal data in database systems. You want to review access models, right? Understand the attack surface area. So how can people possibly get at that data? What data might be exposed, and then also track the data flows and map the data lineage to know how data is moving throughout your systems and where they, again, where you could possibly have vulnerabilities. When we start to look at some of the technologies, things like T-SQL queries using full text search. If you turn on full text search, it allows linguistic searches against text data, against words and phrases, right? So data classification tooling here, and then also the vulnerability assessment. So when we look at SQL data discovery and classification, this is a new tool that was released. It's available in SQL Server Management Studio. It can scan data and identify potential sensitive data. Sensitive data labels can be tagged to columns so that you can report off of those tags and labels down the road. And database classification state can be reported, right? So this is a sample of a report that you can spit out. This is printable that you can hand to an auditor or a compliance officer. And this is part of the latest version of SQL Server Management Studio. The next step as part of the discovery is to find out where your vulnerabilities lie, right? So do this vulnerability assessment, again, in the latest version of SQL Server Management Studio. It looks for misconfigurations, excessive permissions, and unprotected sensitive data based on what Microsoft's best practices and requirements from various regulatory bodies have determined as sensitive data, right? So we saw the list at the beginning when you talk about names and emails and social security numbers and sort of all that detailed information. This is going to look for patterns like that to try and automatically identify where some of the areas you might be out of compliance, okay? So after you've discovered your data, next you're going to go in and manage that. So you're going to manage the authentication and authorization, right? You're going to properly configure your database firewall to make sure that people aren't getting access to your databases, and you're going to limit application access according to authorization principles. Okay, so when we start talking about things like Windows authentication versus SQL authentication, Azure Active Directory authentication, and role-based security, dynamic data masking and row-level security. These are some of the technologies as part of the more recent SQL Server additions that really help you to identify some of the data and then manage it, secure it, to make sure that people can't get unwarranted access. When we look at a technology like dynamic data masking, right, it's essentially applying a masking rule to query results. So you define what needs to be masked. If a column contains credit card numbers or social security numbers or other PII, personal identifiable information, or any kind of GDPR information that you do not want to be exposed, you can set up this dynamic data masking. Now, in fairness, let's not consider this to be any kind of encryption method or things like that, because you can still query against the data. It's just not going to show you the data in the database. So for instance, if you're protecting somebody's salary information and you want to do a query that says, salary range is between 100 and 150,000, it's going to show you what users are within that range. So that data is not encrypted, and again, it can be accessed, it just wouldn't show the actual information. So the masking is to make sure you're protecting what is in those rows and columns. When we talk about row-level security, right, you've got fine-grained access control, right? So this is one of the newer technologies that came along in SQL Server. It gives users access to only the data they should have access to, right? So you can set this up through group membership or execution context, and you can really limit what a particular user can see. The example here, you can see you have a nurse, select star from patients. That nurse only has access to wing 1, and so they can only see the data that's coming, that's relevant to patients in Wing 1, right? Next step is you really want to protect that data, okay? So encrypting the data at rest, in motion, and when it's being used. Maintain records of audits of all database activities, right? Detect any kind of data breaches and respond accordingly. And then also, very importantly, ensuring business continuity with things like always-on replication. When we start looking at some of these technologies, TLS and transparent data encryption and always encrypted, SQL auditing, always on, and replication and temporal tables, right? These are all tools, again, that are in part of the modern data platform that are really enabling a lot better security and privacy. So what is always encrypted, right? It's a feature designed to protect sensitive data such as social security numbers and credit card numbers and those types of things, right? It provides a separation between who owns the data and who can manage the data. So who owns it, who can see it, and then who can manage it and who can use it, but not actually see what it is, right? So it's going to help prevent data disclosure, right? It's got client-side encryption. It's also going to protect against queries on encrypted data, right? So it's not going to allow the querier to see that information, and it also provides application transparency. So there are minimal application changes through server and client library enhancements. The next would be transparent data encryption, right? It encrypts SQL Server data files or encrypts them at rest. So when you have your SQL Server file and log file on your file server, if that's encrypted through TDE and you want to move it to another database, you need to have those encryption keys to unlock it. It's not, otherwise you won't be able to access that data. So it's making sure that you can't take that database somewhere else, right? The next thing is temporal tables, right? So basically, you can think of this as like a snapshot of a table designed to keep full history of data changes, allowing point-in-time analysis, right? So data obviously is changing very, very quickly, but if you want to look at the state of your data at a particular time, you can set up the temporal tables so that it's capturing that information as it goes along, and you can go back and look at that information at a specific point in time. And really what it does is, by enabling the easy querying of historical data states, it really sets you up to be able to report off of it, right? So when we look into step 4, temporal tables helps us with protecting, but then it also helps us with reporting, right? So when we need to report, we need to maintain audit records of database activities. And we also need to continually assess and analyze our security measures to making sure we're remaining compliant, okay? And then one other bullet that should be on here is that if we do have a breach, we need to report it immediately to make sure that the affected parties know, and we are taking the right steps to make sure we're no longer out of compliance. And with these, with SQL technologies, auditing has been around for a long time. But now when we look at it, we've got, the new vulnerability assessment. I'll jump into the audit first, right? So this is going to help us retain an audit trail of selected events. So anything that changes in the database, we're going to know who, what, when, where, why, and how, right? So you're going to get all that information that you need to really help you understand what has been done in your systems while you are asleep at night, if you will, right? So several levels of auditing for SQL Server, right? So you can set up the varying levels depending on what your requirements are. And again, the GDPR guidelines are very specific in this information. So if there are any questions specifically around that, you can check the guidelines and they'll tell you exactly what level of auditing you need. Another new tool that has come out recently, and again, can be used through SQL Server Management Studio, is the SQL Vulnerability Assessment tool, right? So this will help you meet the compliance requirements that require database scan reports, right? It's going to help you meet the data privacy standards, and it's going to monitor a dynamic database environment where changes are difficult to track, right? So this is something that's allowing you to monitor your environments to make sure that, again, you are staying compliant and letting you know where areas of concern might be. So if we look at some of the examples here, right? Sensitive data columns should be identified, and it categorizes it under data protection, and it gives you a medium risk, whereas the DBO information should be consistent between the target DB and mask, right? So surface area reduction, so this is a really neat tool. Again, check out the latest version of SQL Server Management Studio, and you can play around with it. So now that we've looked at the 4 steps, the discover, manage, protect, and report, how can SQL Server help us with this today, right? So obviously we talked about the discovery process, where you want to identify and track that personal data. You can easily query the database to uncover personal data, and you can tag data with sensitive labels using extended properties. So we need to make sure we keep track of where we have vulnerable areas, and we need to make sure that we keep an eye on those areas, right? So next, you're going to manage the access to that data, right? So using data masking and row level security to make sure that people can only see what they need to see, as opposed to sort of this blanket everybody can see anything idea, right? You need to protect that data, right? Using encryption, tracking any changes that are happening, and you can, continuously use the learning algorithms that are provided by Microsoft using machine learning to identify unusual or suspicious activity. So again, this is kind of futuristic stuff. It's really, really cool, right? Because you've got this constant monitor that's making sure that any areas that are being exposed are being watched, and new areas and new ways of attack are constantly being updated and checked out. And then keeping your records, right? So track and report on all the database activity with the granularity that's required based on the GDPR principles. And all of that auditing can be configured to what you need. Now, much of the demand of this has come up because of the fact that, one of the more popular versions of SQL, 2008 and 2008 R2, are coming to end of life. 2005 came to end of life a couple years ago now. We're just past the anniversary date, actually. And, and now summer of next year, 2008 and 8 R2 are going to stop being supported. And really, that extended support, any of the patching, can make you more susceptible to attack. 2012, the mainstream support has ended, but the extended support, you've got a few more years, and then we kind of move on from there. But anybody who's running 08 and 08 R2, goodness knows there's still people out there on 05 and even SQL 2000. You really need to start considering getting those updated to be in compliance with things like GDPR and any kind of PII areas of concern and things like that. And really, the meaning of this end of life or end of support really is that you're not going to get any security updates. You're going to have compliance concerns, and maintaining all of that legacy equipment and software, it gets expensive, right? So something that we want to consider as we move along. Obviously security holes are opened up if we're not getting hot fixes and patches for a technology that's 10 years old. Then we are more prone to attack if new attack vectors are opened up. And then obviously the compliance, right? Failure to be compliant can lead to business complications, right? Penalties and fines across several industries. Again, you don't want to be the person who gets caught being out of compliance, because as we talked about in the very beginning, those fines that are levied are pretty heavy. So just keep that in mind, right? And then, really, there are a lot of options here on ways to upgrade your SQL Server. So if you're running on one of the older versions, or really some of the technologies that we talked about today, you'd like to take advantage of, moving to SQL 2016 or 17, moving to Azure SQL Database, or lift and shifting your SQL Server to Azure VMs, we can help with a lot of these things, and there are a lot of options, right? So there are some very, very streamlined migration paths. Migrations, I wouldn't say, are ever easy per se, but when you've got a very good understanding of what a migration requires, and the amount of information that goes into that migration process, as we do here at Pragmatic Works, it makes it a much more streamlined process, and sets up a much better baseline for success. So here are a couple of options on how to do it. We can help you move your on-premises databases from any of the older versions to some of the newer versions, and we would put together a full scope on how that process works, and the steps that it takes to do so. We're doing projects like this all the time. Also, more and more, we're getting a lot more Azure SQL database requirements. So as you saw in the poll, there were a fair amount, more than a third of the attendees have started playing with the cloud in some way, shape, or form. As Abraham jumps in here in just a minute, he's going to talk about some of those tools for Azure Data Platform uses, where it'll really help with some of those compliancy needs, right? So as we kind of move along, remember that Pragmatic Works has proven success in these areas. So doing these migrations and helping people get their systems compliant or into a more modern basis, then we've got a lot of experience with this, and we'd really love to help you out. So if there are any questions or anything like that, throw them in the chat window, or we can have a follow-up call afterward. So that wraps up my part. I'm going to hand it off now to Abraham, and he can talk to you guys more about the Azure Data Platform and where Microsoft is going with this, and some really exciting stuff.
Yep. Hey guys, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Great. Let me just go ahead and share my screen. Are you guys seeing my monitor right now?
Not yet.
Okay.
There it is. Got it.
Okay, great. All right, great. So let's just talk a little bit about GDPR and how exactly can you leverage Azure technologies to be in compliance. So one of the key things to understand about when we talk about GDPR is just that, traditionally what are the boundaries of compliance here, right? So when we're normally talking about it, so let's say we have data stored in SQL Server or in Azure, for example, in Cosmos DB or a big data store, you're usually thinking about customer data and end user information. But what GDPR does is really expand the boundaries to include all personal data. So it's personal data privacy that is the key here, right? So if it's personal data, the ability to have privacy on that personal data. And so what Microsoft, so you want to be able to, it continues to go where you can actually take what is traditionally known as personal data or customer data, and it kind of expands it to other personal data like unique identifiers, telemetry tied to end users, and then it also will go into, for example, if you have enterprise level data that's related to, if you have an IP, for example, of where somebody is coming from, that is also in consideration when it comes to GDPR. So that's just an awareness of what you have to provide, for example, as Chris was talking earlier, right? So when it comes to personal data privacy, and we looked at this slide before, if, for example, if one of your customers or one of your clients, etc., or a user says they would like to get access or erase all their personal data, you need to be able to provide that. And that's where Azure really comes in. When you're leveraging Azure Services, Microsoft makes sure that all the Azure tooling is in compliance with, obviously, there's a lot of ISO standards, right? So we're going to touch on that. You get that ability and the making sure that it's GDPR compliant. But then what Microsoft is really is doing here with all the services across Azure, so for any kind of storage services, anything that actually has any personal data, is the ability to have controls over your personal data, the ability for customers, so Microsoft customers, as they deploy applications, to be able to have controls, notifications, the protection that you need, right, on that personal data, and to have transparent policies. And one of the other core things I would say is that, it's not like a magic switch to turn on, hey, now you're GDPR compliant. It is something that is ongoing. And you want to be able to continually, for example, for IT training and staff, and as you deploy new applications, you want to be able to have the organization take control and train the IT staff, take control of these new applications or existing applications, and to be able to adhere to the GDPR compliance. So that's actually very important to be able to manage and maintain the compliance as you move forward. So it's not like, for example, like, if you remember, if you're in the Y2K time, when Y2K hit, you're like, oh, good, I got past it. The applications are still up and running and working. It's not like a thing that, it hits next month, for example, right, and you're done like that. It is actually something that you, as the folks in the organization, need to build upon, and that's what Microsoft tries to leverage. So where does Microsoft come into play with the Azure services? So the core principle from Satya is to empower every organization and every person. So Azure really plays a core. We try across, as a dev team, is building out the tooling from the ground up. Security is a core principle, and with GDPR compliance and all the ISO standards that have to be complied to the services, want to make sure that let's say you're leveraging, for example, Power BI, or you're leveraging SQL database, or an HD Insight cluster, or whatever it is, or just blob storage, right? You want to be able to assess and mitigate the risk. So we provide, the service itself provides the tool to be able to assess and mitigate risks. Azure Services help you try to maintain availability across the board. So you will see, for example, if you spin up a new SQL managed instance, or a SQL database, or even with like Power BI, or just a VM, right? Automatically you get regional high availability, and you can expand that to geo high availability. So that's one of the core things. And to be able to comply, one of the core things is to be able to comply with relevant laws and regulations. So make sure that your service that you're using, Microsoft wants to make sure that that service is able to comply with your existing regulations and to be able to protect the customer data. So you will see, as Chris already talked about, and we'll talk a little bit more about how to leverage Azure services to protect customer data. So one of the other things that we want to talk about from an Azure perspective is that when it comes to GDPR certification, currently there isn't a specific GDPR compliance standards, but it is expected that there might be a new ISO standard coming out maybe later this year, or more likely somewhere in 2019. It's the new ISO standard 27552, which will actually be in compliance with GDPR. And when that comes out, Microsoft will make sure that all the services are in compliance with that. So until that time, what we try to do is give you the ability across the board to fill all the gaps with Azure ISO auditing and all the standards that are there, so that your application, you're able to service back to your customers and comply with GDPR. So Azure is audited against all these controls by external vendors and auditors. So when it comes to just compliance in Azure, you will see that there is the deepest level of most comprehensive compliance in the industry is there in Azure. And there's actually a website, if you're interested, that actually you can drop down any service, for example, for a specific region, what type of service, let's say the Azure Government Cloud or the Azure Public Cloud or Power BI, what are the standards that it's adhering to currently and what is it certified for, right? If you're in an industry where HIPAA is important, it'll be compliant with that. So we try to make sure that you have the standard compliance already in the service so that you can build upon that. And that's really the core core here. So just as we were talking about in Azure, one of the things that we want to do is leverage services and the features of services to be able to discover, identify personal data and where it's residing. So because sometimes you don't know, it could be sitting in some sort of a PDF document, right? Or it could be private data in a storage location or in a SQL database or someplace else. So you want to be able to have the right tooling to discover it and then to manage it. How do you govern personal data and how it's assessed? And of course, on top of that, after you discover it, you need to be able to protect it. So you want to be able to build security controls to prevent, detect, respond to any type of vulnerability. So that's one of the key things, and the ability to be able to report back on, keep documentation, to keep managed. If there is a request for data service request by, let's say, a governmental organization, you want to be able to leverage the services in Azure to be able to do that quickly and efficiently, and you want to be able to hit all of them. So there's a lot of different services in Azure, right? And if you've already played or worked with Azure or just been in a discovery phase with Azure, you will see there's tons of PaaS, a lot of PaaS services, a lot of IaaS services. Where and how and when can you leverage certain solutions? So we'll just quickly go over some of the highlights here. So talking about discovery, let's take a look at discovery here. So when it comes to the scope of discovery, what is in scope and what do we want to identify? We want to be able to identify any kind of personal data. So if it's like medical information to social media posts, IP addresses, cookies, cultural identity, etc. And you want to be able to also have an inventory of all of this. And some of the sample services that Azure has, and we won't be able to jump to every service, but we want to be able to highlight and give you the ability to leverage some of these services and to discover. And we already went through some of the tooling that's there in SQL Server, right, for like Management Studio. Those tools can be used directly with Azure services such as Azure SQL database and the new Azure SQL managed instance, you'll be able to leverage that directly. From an Azure perspective, one of the core things that will hold personal data, right, across your organization is Active Directory. So Azure Active Directory, when you're using Azure, it helps you ensure that only authorized users have access to the environment. Where can it helps. There's key features in there, from multi-factor authentication to privileged account management to role-based access controls. So what are you trying to do? If you need to locate customers, if you need to locate employees, if you need to locate guest user accounts, etc., and if it contains personal data, it will help you find and change personal data for specific users very quickly, and it will enable you to change user profiles, work information. That's actually a very powerful thing about Azure Active Directory that's there. And for an administrator, this is kind of like the center point to where it starts, and it really helps you out, especially across organizations that have a scope in many countries, to be able to manage and to be able to take advantage of these key features across to comply with GDPR. One of the tools that a lot of times is not really talked about as much is there's a tool in Azure called Azure Data Catalog. I don't know if everybody's heard of it. It is a great discovery tool if you want to keep a metadata library of all your data sources and tagging. It really helps you discover, and the service is nearly free in Azure, and it's really the reason why is because Microsoft wants to be able to help its customers when they're using, for example, SQL Server or Azure SQL DB, or it could be an Oracle database, or it could be Postgres or file systems, SFTP. You want to be able to help discover and understand data sources to not only to get more value from existing sources, but it also helps with metadata management, metadata indexing by the service. So you can easily search, discover data, right? And it also provides a strategic platform to become compliant with GDPR. It's a great tool to check out. And some of the key features that's there in data catalog is just the fact that the amount of sources that you have. Not only do you have Azure sources, but you have all types of on-premise. These services could be running anywhere. So you have an array of on-premise and cloud sources. So if you need to catalog your Salesforce, for example, or your SAP business objects, you can do it with Azure Data Catalog. You're able to provide things like business and technical metadata and annotations. You're able to keep an asset of all documentation, so you can you can put documentations behind the sources. So for example, if a new person is coming in, or if an auditor is checking, hey, what's in, so what is the documentation behind some of your models, right? You're able to keep that in there and link it back to the model. And that's really one of the most powerful things about the data catalog, contextual asset consumption. So you're able to tag it, and you're able to tell it who are the experts in your organization behind certain models and certain data sources, etc. So it's actually very relevant across your business users and your technical users, and it's a great tool to leverage whenever you need this kind of discovery tool that you need. So that's actually really a handy tool, and we already talked about some of these things. So I'm not going to go deep into this part here, but the SQL Azure DB and now also SQL Managed Instance that's coming, that's actually in preview, and it's available later next month. I'm sorry, not later next month. I believe later this quarter to be in GA, allows you to that data discovery and classification that we talked about in Management Studio is also available in Azure. So you can leverage it with Management Studio, or you can leverage it directly in the Azure portal when you want to discover and classify and label different columns and put in advanced auditing and protection. And you have that ability, as we talked about earlier, to be able to export and provide this reporting with your documentation to auditors, etc. So that's actually a really powerful capability. You also have the vulnerability assessment, right? So that's actually in Management Studio, and you're also able to use Security Center, which we'll talk about a little bit later, to be able to review and access models, understand the surface area, and that's also a powerful capability. Then you also have a few other things, as simple as in SQL Server and in also Azure SQL DB and managed instances across the board. There's extended properties and the ability to query across, and another key capability that a lot of times you forget for like the data warehouse, the SQL DB, is the ability. There's a technology called Polybase that gives you the ability to be able to quickly, directly link to blob storage, big data storage, and access those files, and to be able to query against it to identify objects. So remember to keep that in handy. The technology is called Polybase, and it's basically external tables, right? So when you want to be able to identify any kind of personal data in big data sources that are residing, and you want to be able to report on it this way, you're able to do that. It's actually a really cool and powerful capability built into it's in there in SQL Server, and it's also available in SQL databases, SQL Data Warehouse, and it's also available for the new SQL managed instance also. One of the other things, we talked a little bit about full text, right? So when you take that and you put it into the cloud perspective, how can you? There's multiple search mechanisms, but when you're talking about various types of documents, there is a service called Azure Search, which is being revamped, and this is coming out only in build. They're going to talk a little bit about it in about 2 weeks, where you're able to building on top of Azure Search is something called Azure Cognitive Search. This ability to be able to take PDFs, Word files, Excel, PowerPoint, audio, video, any kind of various custom files, and also a lot of free-form text that, if you have it in SQL Server or any kind of object, any kind of data source, to be able to pull that, so to be able to extract it and put it on, index it, but then on top of the indexes, right, one of the key things is the ability not only to search on it, but the ability to be able to query tune it using the cognitive services. So the cognitive services are built right in to Azure Cognitive Search. So you're able to use the API, and you're able to learn over time specific search terms. So this is a great way to discover data. So if you have it in various documents across your organization, this is a great way to be able to discover different different kind of personal data that you need to keep across the board. So this is a powerful feature, that this is actually a powerful service available that you can connect back into any kind of blob storage, any kind of document store, and the ability to be able to push data into these searches, into this service, the Azure Search, and to put cognitive search to discover personal data. So that's another really great service that's there in Azure to leverage. So just jumping back a little bit, when it comes to the overall information protection and identifying personal data, Azure has what is called information protection. And the most common way you can see it is if you are, like, let's say your organization uses O365, and they actually put information protection on your documentation, right? So for your documents, etc., if there is information protection on it, Azure Information Protection can be used not only against O365, but it can be used against an array of services and applications. So information protection can be applied to Android devices, right? So it can be applied to iPhone. So from devices to core services, you're able to do that. And it helps you ensure that data is identifiable and the fact that it's securable regardless of where it's stored and how it's shared. So and the great thing is, as somebody who's using this tool, it helps you classify, label, protect new or existing data, right? So it also helps users to be able to share it with people outside your organization with a level of enhanced security, right? And behind information protection, there is rich logging and reporting capabilities and the ability to provide options to manage and control encryption keys. So it really has some core features regarding classification, encryption, rights management that you want to leverage when you're using it, when you specifically in the case of personal data. And then you also can leverage things like Azure Data Factory. Azure Data Factory had version 2 just came out. And version 2 helps you not only can you leverage the data factory, but you can leverage your existing SSIS packages in data factory. So that's actually a really powerful capability to extend your ETL and your pipelines into Azure as you need and when you need. So some of the core features of data factory is it helps trace and locate personal data, so you can actually and provide monitoring visualizations to identify when data arrived, where it came from, so you can actually keep a history of this, and then it can be reported upon. So provides that capability to automate data pipelines. So you're able to allow the organization the ability not only to orchestrate and automate data movement and transformation, but then also be able to provide reporting on this to say, hey, data came in from this location at this time and was stored here, etc. So you keep that logging also. And then there's simple, if you just need to query for certain other places, if you don't want to use Polybase, etc., to go into a big data store such as HT Insight, the framework is there to be able to, and the connectors are there to be able to go in and use tools such as Excel to connect back to your big data systems for discovery. So that's also another key thing to keep leverage. And there's a lot more. You can see there's a learn more link, so we'll definitely provide some additional information for all of this as we go forward after the meeting. So just that's from a discovery phase, and we only touched on a little bit on discovery, right? There's a variety of other tools, but then I want to actually talk a little bit about these different array of how to manage and how personal data is used and accessed, and the scope of it is across data governance, right? So defining policies, roles, responsibilities across, and what are the tooling, what are the right tools in Azure to be able to help you with this management, and also data classification. We already talked a little bit about it, but then as you're managing, you want to be able to classify sensitivity and things like that. So we're going to talk a little bit more about in the scope of managing. So, and some of the examples of the tools is obviously in Azure Active Directory, and then across Azure, there's role-based access control, short form is RBAC. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. In Azure Active Directory, there is PIM, so Privileged Identity Management. That's there. And then, in SQL DB, we talked already about SQL Server, but the technologies in SQL Server, it's actually now first built for the cloud. So you'll see those technologies. It's before even 2016 came out, SQL Server, Microsoft actually changed where it's building for the cloud first, and those technologies flow in to the on-premise and the services that you can use on-premise. So you will see these technologies such as dynamic data masking and role-level security already there in Azure services such as SQL DB, Azure Analysis Services, etc. So going back a little bit on what is RBAC, right? So role-based access control is across Azure. So the ability to go into any service, right? So the example here is Data Factory, but you can go into specifically like a VM or a SQL database or a SQL managed instance, a big data store such as a Databricks cluster that you spin up in Azure, the ability to be able to enable you to identify, define very grained access permissions uh, across the board, and to be able to grant users just the permissions and the access that they need to perform their tasks, and to be able to enforce the separation of duties. So that's actually a core thing. RBAC is across the board in Azure, and as administrators and as owners of specific services, you can enable and allow only certain actions for accessing personal data, rather than giving everybody, unrestricted permissions for Azure resources. So you can granularly define it at the service level what type of access people need, and that's what RBAC is. And so it's role-based access across the board, and you can administer it through the portal. You can administer it directly using Azure CLI if you want, Python or PowerShell, etc., and Azure Management APIs. So these management APIs, you can use your favorite language, right, to be able to access these management APIs and to be able to enable RBAC across Azure. A little bit more on from an Active Directory and a permission privileged identity management, right? It's called PIM, Azure AD. So what it does is some of the key features is privilege ended for across your directory. So it minimizes the number of people who have access to certain information, for example, like personal data. And it also helps you enable and discover and restrict and monitor privileged identities and access to those resources. So that's actually a powerful capability. It enables you to enforce on-demand, just-in-time administrative access when you need. So you can actually pull back access as you need. So that's actually a really great feature to be able to go into a cloud service and manage, control, and monitor access within your organization in Azure. And jumping in from a data storage, right, data store perspective, here's some samples of Azure SQL Database, Azure SQL Managed Instance, and Azure Analysis Services. What you've always used to on-premise, Azure lets you manage it with managed instances and Azure Analysis Services and SQL DB. The ability for role level security is directly there, so you get fine-grained access to specific users, so you're able to filter and build multi-tenant applications and prevent unauthorized users. So that's great for role-level security, and it's built into services in Azure that you can leverage. And we already talked about dynamic data masking. That's also available in Azure SQL DB, Azure SQL Managed Instances, right? So you can just simply leverage it as you need, just the same way you have leveraged it, or you're leveraging it, or you're planning to leverage it on premise, you can leverage it in Azure. Just let's jump in as we are going through on time. So let's talk a little bit about protection. How do you protect the data that you put in Azure, right? So Azure gives you a framework to be able to secure controls to prevent, detect, respond to vulnerabilities and breaches. And it's actually a key thing at this scope level. One of the most important things is to be able to protect your data and establish the security controls to prevent, detect vulnerabilities, and not only that, but to be able to respond to vulnerabilities and data breaches. So preventing data access is a core thing that we want to take very seriously across the board, right? I mean, not only for GDPR compliance, for any kind of security standards, that's one of the core things. And GDPR requires that you are able to detect any kind of vulnerabilities and to be able to respond to breaches, but also to be able to detect. Azure goes beyond that, and we talked a little bit about it before. The threat level detection is already built in to many of these services that you're looking at. For example, SQL DB and SQL Data Warehouse has threat level protection. So if potentially, even if somebody is trying to get some type of access to your system, the threat level protection is automatically monitoring your system, and you can actually have emails sent to the proper groups internally to access it and to see if that is an actual way, a potential threat on your system. There's other examples also. Obviously, we have encryption of data at rest built in from every type of storage. Pretty much has it for the PaaS services in Azure, and we're going to talk about that. The Key Vault is a very powerful tool. All right, you can spend a lot of money on-premise to have a key in your own Key Vault. Azure has it built in, and you're able to leverage it for a variety of stuff. The disk encryption we're going to talk about that, and the Azure Security Center, which is actually a very core service in Azure that you can leverage. So how does the Azure Key Vault help you with protecting data? This is one of the core things, and you can leverage the Key Vault even with, for example, if you're encrypting with specific keys for your on-premise environment, and you have these keys and you need a vault to store these keys, you can leverage Azure Key Vault as your vault to keep these keys protected. So Azure Key Vault enables separation of duties for web applications, enables segregation of role functionality and management of keys and data. So the administrator can actually have the control of the Key Vault and to be able to manage it accordingly. So it's a cloud service for maintaining control of your keys and access and encrypt of your data. And obviously, this is under your control, and you control it across the board. And it gives you the ability for key management process and the ability to grant and revoke permissions across the board. So this is, for example, if you're encrypting with SQL Server or disk level encryption, and you want to bring your own key, and you need to store it in a Key Vault, you can leverage the Azure Key Vault across the board. So when it comes to storage encryption, right, it's automatically there built in for you to leverage. So when it comes to Azure Storage, it allows you to request that the storage service is automatically encrypt the data when writing to it, all right, and then keeps encryption, decryption management keys transparent to users. So you don't have to really worry too much from a key perspective. The users will use the system as they've always used it, and you're able to encrypt data with 264-bit keys for encryption across the board. So that's one of the key features. So you are able to automatic handling of encryption and decryption, and the ability to support it across the board with available redundancy types. So that's also a very powerful thing. So, and when it comes to data at rest encryption, or for the folks that have always used SQL Server, right, you know it as TDE. Right, that is across Azure SQL. It's there in SQL Data Warehouse. It's there in Cosmos and across Azure Storage. Right, so you are able to data encryption performs real-time encryption and decryption of data at rest. So you're able to take advantage of it. Not only that, you can bring your own keys. For example, the Azure SQL database allows you to be able to bring your own keys. Some of the other ways, we already touched on it, so I'm not going to go too detailed into it, is not only is there TDE, but SQL DB has always encrypted built into it. So always encrypted comes along. It's there in Azure SQL DB, and also the SQL managed instances in Azure also have always encrypted to be able to provide that end-to-end encryption across the board. So One of the other core things is we're going to talk a little bit when we get more into the security center is the ability for threat detection. So some of the services that are already leveraging it in Azure is Azure SQL DB and Azure SQL DW is leveraging the ability for threat detection. So it is a feature built into the service to enable for any kind of threat, external or internal threat that's trying to get access to your system, you're notified right away, right? So disk level also encryption is there. So any kind of disk that you present into any kind of VMs, you have disk level encryption supported, so you're able to protect any data that's on that disk. So it gives you the support for any kind of VMs, Windows or Linux, integrates with the Key Vault, and it also uses BitLocker in Windows and de-encrypt in Linux. So the other thing, one of the core features in Azure and the ability to leverage the service with other services, a very powerful capability, is the Azure Security Center. The Azure Security Center provides a unified security management and advanced threat protection across your cloud infrastructure. So you can actually apply security policies using the Security Center across Azure and across workloads, and apply controls on your workloads or just-in-time controls for Azure VMs and Azure Services. And you get this ability, for example, to monitor services, monitor machines, monitor the overall network, the VNet, etc. And it will automatically collect and analyze security data from a variety of sources. So it's actually a really powerful capability that's there to leverage to protect personal data. As we keep moving forward, one of the things the last thing is to report, and I think this is where all the services, but this is one of the key things that stand out with Azure and the services that's there. From a reporting scoping point of view, the ability to keep records. We already talked a little bit about how Azure helps you, for SQL Server, how it helps you with reporting. How does that apply in the cloud, in the Azure cloud? How can you do, for example, reporting on SQL Server, SQL DB, right? So some of the examples here is, let's just talk a little bit about Active Directory reporting. There's a tool called Log Analytics, and we'll talk about some of the other services that you have for Azure monitoring also. Azure AD reporting gives you this ability across the board. Azure AD reporting provides insights into potential risks and affecting the health of your environment. So how does this help? So you can, the key features, users flagged for risk. So report shows user accounts that might be compromised, right? So that's actually, and risky sign-ins. So it helps you where there is any kind of attempt that it might be performed, any kind of risky sign-in is performed by someone who's maybe not the account owner. So it gives you the ability to do that. And then auditing. Auditing is a core capability of AD reporting. So auditing logs, activity report, show the history of tasks performed on your tenant and the sign-in activity across the board. So it gives you full auditing across the board. Log analytics can be used as a service. This can be used across the board to do log analytics across many services. So it gives you some key features, just quickly going over it. It provides you configurable security and auditing and logging options to identify any kind of gaps, and it also helps you identify breaches. Provides real-time insights. So log analytics through not only through API but also through the UI portal gives you real-time integrated analytics. So integrated search and custom dashboards to analyze lots of millions of records across workloads, across services, and across locations. So it actually is really collecting data for what is going on with your service, and now you're able to have a dashboard that can be customized for graphical view. And you can also have this graphical view API access to it. So if you want to actually present this in a different tool, you have that ability also. Going forward to another tool for helping with monitoring. So you have Azure Monitor, which is built in across services automatically to provide a single location of monitoring logs coming into Azure resources. So it also helps you with the operations. So what is the Azure Monitor? Azure Monitor provides base level metrics and logs across most Azure services. So it collects metrics, right? So you have the log, and you're able to take out that log as you need. And then log analytics can also work and pull this data in as you need. So some of the key things, one of the newest features that just came out this month is Azure SDR. So if you have a request to be able to, let's say a customer or a user puts a request in according to the GDPR standards to data subject request, it's called DSR processing capability in Azure Portal. So if you have a DSR request, Azure enables fulfillment of DSR against customer data. So if somebody requests that data, you have the ability to provide that data with Azure Services. So it works across services. So data through pre-existing APIs, we're able to access, rectify, delete, and export data. So any kind of personal data, it gives you that ability to do that. Another service that's there built in into Azure, right? So, and that Microsoft has to be able to leverage is Compliance Manager. So what is Compliance Manager and how can it help? It helps you facilitate collaboration, so it streamlines workflows, teams across the board for audit preparation. So Compliance Manager is there, something that you can take off right away and use that for, let's say, GDPR article tracking, etc. And it really helps you simplify auditing and reporting. So that's there available, and it helps you manage controls, and it also helps you customers manage controls. So you can actually freely use the tool, the Compliance Manager. You just need to sign up, right? And we can provide you these links, and we recommend that you visit the community blog for more information on this stuff. Just there's a variety of resources across the board. One of the things that I just wanted to show as time is running out, so I'm trying to go through it pretty quickly here. Let me actually show you guys the Trust Center. So the Trust Center gives you the ability here. You can see that, you can go by region, right, and across a product. So if I wanted to look, for example, hey, for North America, right? Power BI, for example, let's take Power BI in this case. What are the specific compliance offerings that are already there? So it gives you that list. What about Azure, right? So Azure Government, etc. So if you click on Azure Government, you will see all the regulations. So the Trust Center, it's just Microsoft.com Trust Center, gives you this ability to be able to go in and find compliance across. So if you want to know, for example, in Europe, right, what compliance does Azure have automatically, it gives you that, and you can actually put it in. If you're in the health industry, right, what are the compliance offerings across country, across industry? It gives you where it operates. So you can actually look at the details of these compliance offerings. So the Trust Center is actually a very powerful tool that you can leverage anytime it's available, and we'll provide more information on it. If you guys need, feel free to contact and we can provide you the information. So there's actually GDPR white paper on SQL Server, and there's a GDPR page for Azure that you can go and review. And there's a white paper of overall GDPR regulations, which a lot of the stuff that we talked about, it goes into even more granular detail, and you can get an overview of it using that white paper. And if you want to leverage any of the services, simple as if you want to leverage Azure Data Catalog, just go to Azure and you can leverage it for free. The data catalog is there available, and then you can also leverage it across your organization as you need. So that's just a very high-level overview of what Azure can provide and how you can leverage these services across the board. Not only your data services, but as we said, there's a variety of services, and they plug into each other, and the features to leverage to come to GDPR compliance across the board. So Microsoft basically is building the framework in Azure for your applications and your services to be GDPR compliant, and you can leverage the services and leverage the features to be fully GDPR compliant across your organization as you need. At this time, I'll just pass it back to Brian. Brian, you there? Can you hear us?
I am.
Great.
All right, let me go ahead and find the go to meeting real quick.
Stop sharing.
Thanks, Abraham. I'll make myself the presenter. Share, hopefully the right screen. Hopefully you're seeing the web page here in a moment. Liz, can you confirm that you're seeing?
Yes, you're good.
We got it, Brian. Yep.
Cool. You're not seeing my other screen then. Okay, got it.
Yep.
All right, good. Well, I figured that I had about 3 hours left in my presentation, so we go ahead and read the entire GDPR regulation right now. And starting with Chapter 1. No, I'm kidding. This is a really big deal, and it's even for U.S. companies like ourselves. When we are housing European customers in our database, it does impact even U.S. companies like us. So unfortunately, when I was like you guys, where I first heard this regulation, like, oh man, it sucks to be them as far as companies that have to implement it. But it turns out that it actually impacts the entire world, not that are servicing Europeans, not just Europeans servicing Europeans. So we had a few questions that came in, Chris, that I probably good timing on also. One question was about what does GDPR stand for? You're seeing right here, General Data Protection Regulation. Another question was around what should I do with backups? Well, the main thing you have to consider is you want to make sure that the backups can't be restored by another entity, and all of a sudden that privacy data is all exposed. So that's one of the things you have to make sure is you are responsible for that. Anything that has privacy data inside of it, and the backups by default would have your entire customer data exposed, unless you do password protect that, preventing others from seeing that also. So my part of the presentation is about a few additional tools that you can use to help you with your compliance. Now, what we typically look at is the ICO requirements. This is the UK's requirements for GDPR regulation. What they provide companies is a template that looks a little bit like this. And you can get this from the ICO website. So the ICO website is ico.org.uk. And this is their information commissioner's office, all around protecting information. So this is a format that's a pretty good format for essentially documenting your database, where you can say, okay, this table has the following business function. It's housing login information, for example. And the purpose of processing this data is I need it for my customers to log in, or need historical data, whatever. But ultimately, this is what an auditor is going to come to you looking for this kind of information. So what type of individuals are you storing in this database? What kind of personal data does it store in this table? So for example, I might have the category of individuals might be customer, and the category of personal data might be historical information about those customers. And then and so on and so on and so on. So this is a good doc. It's quite a robust doc, as you can see, but it kind of gets you started to make sure that you're kind of guiding down that example. So you can see an example tab here. You'll see an example of what one might look like, all fully spelled out. So you'll see the purpose of processing the payroll or personnel files, and what kind of individuals you're storing in this. So at Pragmatic Works, we wanted to find a way to make this a little bit easier for you. So there's two little demos I'm going to cover, and we won't be taking up the full 45 minutes. Don't worry, you'll get some of your lunch hour back here. So our purpose of our demos are going to be around, well, how do I help produce this document, and how do I store this information? And secondarily, after I document this, how do I go through and test to make sure that Abraham, who requested to be out of my system, is actually out of my system? So those are two demos I'm going to focus on today. A tertiary goal also is in GDPR, if data is leaving your premises, if it's leaving your data center and going to a partner, for example, you do have to know, have to know where those touch points are and how that's going to impact. So that could be an issue also. So just a few things around that. So first of all, Pragmatic Works about 7 years ago, made this product called DocExpress. And the goal of DocExpress is to scan all the metadata from your environment. And so if I go open up DocExpress real quick, there we go. So what's going to happen is I'm going to go through and document all of my IS packages, my Analysis Services cubes, my SQL Server databases, whether they're in Azure, whether they're on-premise, and it captures all that metadata into a central repository for you. Now, once you've got that captured, you can go through and generate documentation on it. You can also do things like compare the snapshots, find out how your environments change between months. Now, the most important thing here, though, is going to be showing lineage. This is where you can go through and say, well, how do these systems all interconnect? Like, where is data leaving my environment, for example? So, for example, if I go over to this higher ed database here, this is my data warehouse, we can see these are all the packages that are feeding data in and out of my database. And I can get down to the column level and say, well, where is it going after that? So if I go high detail here, I can say, all right, let's get down to the column level now and find out what actually loads that one column in this database, this donor database, which has GDPR data inside of it. So this has all of my address information, my donor information, and as you can see here, this is what it's related to. These are the packages that are loading it. I can hit show more and find out where it goes after that. But we can also find out, where files are being created and where it leaves my premise. So this is how you can use lineage to kind of combat GDPR around that. Okay, so this is one piece, but the other piece that I'm more keen on with GDPR is also the documentation to produce that ICO document. For doing this, what I've done is I've selected this data dictionary piece. This is inside DocExpress, and I hit edit categories. Now, what I've done, I've had a whole bunch of other ones here for other regulations I'm doing, like Sarbanes-Oxley and all that. But what I've done is I've captured a few of the elements from the ICO Excel spreadsheet you saw a moment ago. For example, what is the business function of this? What are the categories of individuals stored in a given table? So if I hit this, you'll see I'm allowing employee, I have a little drop-down box here, employees, customers, vendors, and so on. Now, this is going to apply to any SQL Server table. I'm going to require this additional metadata be stored about those customers. Okay, so that's a little piece around that we're going to store, and so on and so on. Now, once we do this, there's two ways we can capture that doc. I can just go through and hit the Analyze button. This can find all the criteria that I have not documented, or I can kind of drill down and find, okay, what SQL Server databases do I want to document? Let's just do the databases right now. I can also import and export out of that Excel spreadsheet. So I can export button, and it'll export it out of the metadata library and into the Excel spreadsheet that I can use also. You saw that in the previous screen here. Well, here's my databases right here. And as I drill down and I look at these tables, we're seeing here a list of all the tables. Here are the extra requirements I have for it. I have not snapshotted this database, or I will see the ICO on that point. So what we're seeing here, the ones I have before my snapshot. And I can go through and actually add, okay, this actually has GDPR data inside of it, this one does not, and so on, and hit save, and it saves all that in one foul swoop. This is one way of doing it. The secondary way of doing it is in a web page. So this is the DocExpress server side, where I'm kind of seeing the documentation for this entity here called DIM donor. I can also see this is the diagram of the lineage impact that I saw before. And what I can do is I can look at this lineage and kind of same thing we saw before. I can right click on it and say, well, show me the document for this and show that to me in analyst mode. So now I'm seeing the analyst doc of how many rows they have, all the schema, and then there's my data dictionary right there where I can go through and say, all right, this is the category of individuals I'm storing employees in this table, and I'm storing their email address information inside. I can type any kind of other business rules I have here. Like the business owner is Brian Knight, and give an analyst description of stores, employee, whatever, and when I hit save, what that's done is just basically, this is a required one also. What it's done is we've ultimately democratized the documentation for GDPR to our employees and not to the IT team solely. You know, if you put this out to the IT team, typically it won't get done, right? It's just one of those things, the last thing we have priority to do. So in order to get done, you want to hand this to your analyst to get done instead. All right, so this is the way we can document and capture the metadata. Secondarily, we may want to make sure that after a customer does request, one of the GDPR regulations is if a customer requests to be forgotten, we have to comply with that request to be forgotten. So how do we ensure that that has been done? Well, here's the challenge at Pragmatic Works. We've got customer data all over the place. We have it in our marketing system. We have it in our sales system, our Salesforce.com system, for example, our CRM. We have it in our accounting system. We have it in our training system, all over the place. So the customer requests to be forgotten. It's not as simple as just going out and changing it to unsubscribe and then forgetting that customer. We have to do removals from 5, 6 different systems in our case, and including the data warehouse also. We might have 8 different systems. So that's where a testing tool may come in handy. Now you can build this by hand yourself, or you can use a third-party testing tool also. The goal of what Pragmatic Works built in our tool called Legitest was ultimately to allow you to have a platform where you can build whatever kind of test you want, connect to any kind of data system you want, whether it be a cloud data system or an on-premise data system, and work through those tests. So I've built a simple test here over the past half an hour, and what this basically is doing is I built a table of all the people that I want to exclude from my system. So that table looks a little bit like this. You'll see a data different source right here. This is what my table looks like. It just stores their email address information right now. These are the people that should be removed from every system that Pragmatic Works owns. Not just unsubscribe them, but I gotta make sure they're removed so nobody can see their data. So to do this, what I've done is I've built a number of tests. First test is just a simple database check. This is a wizard that I did to build this, and all it's doing is it's saying, all right, count how many times you see this record in my tables, and then make sure that number is 0. If it's above 0, then we have failed. Now, what I've done also is I've created this thing called a data-driven test, and this is allowing me, the reason I had to do this is I basically want to build that test one time and run that test for every user in my exclusion list. So that test is going to return back a list of email addresses like you're seeing here, these 3 here, and it's going to run that test you just saw 3 times in my case. Now the reason why I had to do that is because it's not just a SQL Server test where I can pass in an in clause. It might be a Salesforce.com test. It might be a HubSpot test. It might be a Constant Contact or MailChimp or whatever. So I had to run the test individually one time per record because of that. So for example, right here, you're seeing my Salesforce.com test. This is where I go through, I run a Salesforce query. I say, all right, do I actually find that record in Salesforce? Here's my query. I have an SOQL query in this case. SQL is the query language for Salesforce. And I go ahead and I'm expecting the answer is 0. I'm basically doing a count star on that record. And so I'm expecting to see that record as 0. If I see anything above a 0, then it's a fail. So ultimately speaking here, I'm saying I expect to see 0. Anything above that is a fail. To run these tests, I can hit Run All Tests, and it will begin to run those tests. Now that is the interactive way of running a test. We can also run them, and you'll see my tests are going to fail right now because those customers are in my Salesforce system in my case, and they're in my data warehouse, and they're in another system also. So I have 3 systems, but this would tell me which system they're in and where I need to go ahead and remove those. So like for my example, my Salesforce system, I can expand this. We're seeing the actual customer record. This one passed, this one passed, this one failed right here. This crazy customer number right here has failed. So what we can do then is we go ahead and fix the source system, run the test again, and then we should be in good shape. This is the Visual Studio developer way of running the test. You can also run it through a web page also. Let me actually open up my other web page here. There we go. Now this is the dashboard for Let It Test in a web page. You'll see the little start buttons next to each of these where I can run the test from here. There's a cloud way of running these, and there's an on-premise way of running these also. So in my case, for example, if I run that test and I see there is something wrong, like for example, I'm expecting to see 7,000 rows, I saw 7,003 rows, I can actually kick off an assertion saying, alert the team right here. I can have an action here that says, when you see this, fire off this action. So I'm going to fire off this action right now. This is going to alert my team. What it actually did in my case, I've configured it to do is I've configured it to create a ticket in our IT system. So it's going to, we have a Zendesk here. So it's going to create a ticket inside of Zendesk to alert my support team that we have to remove these 3 customers. It can also fire off a notification, a text alert. It can go ahead and remove those customers potentially. These actions can be whatever you wish. I've wired them up, in my case, to be more of a notification action. And you can configure those in our notification engine right here. You also have the ability, though, you're seeing here in this case, I do range checks here. I can, this is our new version that comes out in 2 days, by the way. This is something called a recipe. And a recipe, whether you're in Visual Studio or whether you're in a web page, it provides you the ability to create brand new tests and connect on-premise or in the cloud and create tests here to ultimately check the row counts, make sure that the data fits certain ranges, and make sure also that Social Security addresses are formatted a certain way. From a GDPR perspective, make sure the data is encrypted or make sure the data is masked in a certain way. So I can basically build a test without having IT skills in this case. I can build it right from the web page. It will build that and deploy it right to the server. So this is a few ways that we can use Let It Test to ultimately make sure that when somebody wants to be forgotten, that they can be forgotten. Okay, so those are a few pieces around that. This is and showing you around Let It Test Online. Beyond that, are there any questions you guys have? Looks like we have a few that are in the queue right now. Otherwise, we'll go ahead and start to wrap up. I think a question here from Abraham here, looks like, based on contextual thing. Is there a site that defines how we should configure SQL audits to be compliant for auditing changes and uses? Abraham, would you know that? Is there a site at the Microsoft that will tell you how to configure the SQL audit for GDPR? Oh, I think you're muted, Abraham. Or
I'm
Chris,
sorry, I was speaking to myself here.
No
problem. So I believe there are a few audit templates, but I'm not sure if they are specifically for GDPR. Let me actually take a note of that. And if you, the gentleman, if you have an email or something, if you want to give Liz, we can actually do a follow-up with them, and I will get them the information. I'll try my best to get you the best information there.
All right, sounds great.
PR, yeah.
All right, we have a good question here also. How would you handle emails that contain ID numbers, et cetera, or any kind of like PI information inside of a PDF or a data embedded into a document, for example? Any ideas on those kinds of pieces? That's outside the database, so that's out of my realm normally. But this is like more the evidence that's dropped behind of a database.
Yeah, so I think that's where I don't know if you've seen. I know you're going through, for example, here. If you open up a browser, I know this is very ad hoc, but Brian, if you open up a browser and search for Azure JFK.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, this is Azure. Oops, just search on the browser. It'll just Azure space JFK. Yeah. You can actually go in, the JFK files. Oops.
Yes, that's jfkfiles.azurewebsite.net. There he is, right there. This is a really amazing template here. I'll let you finish. I'm sorry.
Oh no, I was just going to say the power behind this, right? If you search, for example, Oswald or some, exactly, right? So that's like the most common thing we search for. What this gives you an example is for if you have email, if you have handwritten text, if you have PDFs inside it, what it's doing behind the scenes is leveraging Azure Cognitive Search, right? So you can actually store the data, let's say emails, encrypted PDFs in an encrypted location, and then use the Azure search capability here to be able to search for, like you said, ask for numbers or is any kind of identification. So that's just one way I've seen customers already starting to leverage it. We have customers, for example, they have photos, right? So cognitive, so they will feed the photos and land it in an encrypted location, and then feed the photos into Azure Cognitive Search, and it will allow them to be able to identify people, etc., in specific pictures. So we're doing that with a customer on a specific POC recently. So that's the kind of stuff that it gives you the ability for PDFs, emails, images, etc., exactly what you're showing. So you can definitely leverage the Azure Cognitive Search, and it's Azure Cognitive Search is basically built on top of the cognitive services that you're looking at right here, and also also Azure Search. So they bring these services together, give you a complete story for that kind of an option. Hopefully that answers the question.
Yeah, and we're working with right now, working with the Clay County Sheriff's Department right now to convert things like the handwritten stuff that they have like this into text as well. So whether it be PDFs or images, those kind of things that are scans, it's computer vision that I put in a link in your chat window right now for MJ, but also anybody else that's interested in that as well. It's a great way of actually scanning, of doing that. And this JFK files, I'll put that in your chat window as well. It's a great way of doing things as well. This is all done with computer vision. We have another question here from MJ. So would it interface with things like Exchange Server or Gmails for internal type things? Well, for those, you're going to need a third-party provider to communicate with things like Office 365 or Gmail. We make one of those as part of Task Factory. It's called the email source. You can use that to kind of determine, to kind of read out and make sure that you're not storing any of that information inside that. Once you find the information in a PDF, then get a request to delete it. How that can be accomplished? That's more of a business process in it. Could you, Abraham, what do you think on this one here? So it says once you find the information in the PDF, how do you get a request to delete it? How can that be accomplished? That's something more of a business process. Am I missing the question there?
So Hey guys, can you still hear me? Okay, I just put a link. If you go to that, that's also an example of the full-blown cognitive search, and it gives you some details about that. Yeah, that is part of the, I think, more on the business process side of deleting it. You would probably use, for example, something such as cognitive. If you've used, for example, like TensorFlow or CNTK API, so it not only gives you this ability to be able to remove things like watermarks from documents, but it also gives you the ability to find text and then erase, right? For example, if you see some sort of an identification information, you want to be able to go into that document and erase that. So you're able to leverage the cognitive services and also the deeper, deep learning APIs to leverage it to do that. So it would be a custom business application, but it's definitely doable.
Cool, and I pasted in the unearth.ai as well so everybody can see that as well. All right, well, I think we've pretty much covered the questions at this point. Looks like we'll be returning 20 minutes back to you guys. Thank you so much for coming today. Abraham, anything else you want to close with, or?
No, feel free to contact us. Liz has probably the information. Feel free to contact us. We'll be more than happy to help. Even with like complex cases, we've worked with customers to be able to help them with GDPR compliance. So more than happy to listen to you guys, and thank you so much for the time.
Thank you guys for spending your afternoon or morning with us. Again, this is Brian Knight from Pragmatic Works. You can find me at B-Knight at Pragmatic Works. You can also find Chris at Cisa Furlis at Pragmatic Works, and Abraham, I'll let you if you want to reveal that.
But AB Samuel at Microsoft.com.
There we go. All right, guys, thank you so much and have a great day.
Thank you.